So we're going to be doing a couple of different things today. First, he's going to tell you a little bit about NSAC for those of you who are yet to be initiated. Get to the basics of the Farm Bill. Talk a little bit about the highlights from the last one, opening it up for question and answer, and then moving into a listening session. He's going to be using Menti. And so I'm going to copy and paste the link to Menti in the chat. I'll do this a couple of times as people enter in. This is the page that is going to be used today. Also, if you want to pin Wes King's image, you can always then have him at the front of your screen, and you do that by simply going up in the corner of where you see him right now, clicking, and then you can pin. Also, you can be using the chat. I'll be tracking that and can keep an eye on it for Q&A later on. But with that, I'm just going to turn it right on over to Wes. Thanks, Wes, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jill. Everything sound okay? Great. And you helped me out. You gave an agenda overview, so I don't need to do that now, and I can just really go ahead and jump right into things. The one thing I will say about Mentimeter, that link, for those of you who've already clicked on it, you'll see the same slides that I'm sharing on your screen in a smaller format. But eventually, as you follow along that, there's going to be a series of polls and some questions as part of the listening session. You don't have to wait till we get there to move forward with filling that out. You can go ahead and fill that out ahead of time if you'd like, but you don't have to. You can wait till we get to that portion of the conversation and the presentation. All right, so as Jill said, I'm going to start off with a little bit about NSAC. So NSAC, or the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, is a grassroots alliance of over 130 organizations from all across the country, and we come together to work to improve federal food and farm policy. We've been doing this for over 30 years. Our members have some great diversity to them, from large national organizations to state-based organizations, such as the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, and then also in Ohio, the Initiative for Food and Agricultural Transformation, in fact, at Ohio State University. So I want to talk a little bit, digging a little bit more into NSAC and how we work, just to sort of give you a sense of how this Farm Bill 101 and 2023 Farm Bill listening session fits into our work. So what we do as a coalition lobbying in Washington, D.C., it really comes from the bottom up. What we work on are priorities and issues that are brought to us by our member organizations like OFA, who are working on the ground with farmers and food system stakeholders to build out a more sustainable, resilient food and farming system in our country. And it is through those farmers, stakeholders, and our member groups that we work to move forward with those issues. I say all of this to kind of give, to say that, one, we listen to the grassroots, and our agenda and what we work on is bottom up, not top down. And that is why we like to do, specifically leading up to farm bills, lots of listening sessions with our members and others across the country, so that the work we're doing in the Farm Bill really truly is informed by the needs on the ground of actual farmers and community stakeholders. All right, so let's talk before we get to input and listening about how the Farm Bill can do things better. Let's talk a little bit about the Farm Bill in general. So about every 5 years, give or take a year or two, going all the way back to the early 30s and 40s, Congress develops a fairly massive, comprehensive, multi-year piece of legislation that is generally known as the Farm Bill. Farm bills actually have names, such as the 2018 Agricultural Act. On Congress, in the communities, pretty much everywhere you go, refer to them as the Farm Bill or the 2018 Farm Bill, the 2014 Farm Bill, even though they actually have names to their bills. The Farm Bill, what it essentially does is it sets the rules of the road for our nation's food and farm system. It contains policies, programs, funding, everything from who is and isn't eligible for farm loans to funding for food assistance for low-income communities. The Farm Bill really does truly influence in our country what is produced, by whom it is produced, what's done with those products, where they are sold, who can afford and access those products, all of which influences and impacts the livelihood of farmers, rural communities, the health of our environment, and local economies. While in doing all this work, it also, as part of it, includes deep-seated historical inequities that are part of the structure of agriculture. When it, all across the board, but importantly, things like access to land capital to farm. While the Farm Bill includes these inequities, it also presents itself as an opportunity to drive change. So it is both the source of some problems and inequities within our food and farm system, as well as the opportunity to drive change and make things better. And that's, essentially what INSAC as a coalition exists to do. And part of the reason I'm here is to aid in our collective work and build a better, more resilient farm system. So one of the things that's important to know about the farm is, while it is fairly comprehensive, it is not all-encompassing. There are a number of important things that affect our food and farm system that are outside of the jurisdiction of the Farm Bill. I'm not going to read the list on them, but for those of you who have it up, you can see what's in and what's out in terms of the Farm Bill and its jurisdiction relative to programs and policies. So sometimes, or oftentimes, people are asking, okay, well, if it's in the Farm Bill, what does in the Farm Bill mean? Farm Bill, being in the Farm Bill foremost includes it's authorized. It's a program or policy that is authorized by Congress to exist, but it's much more than that. Being in the Farm Bill often entails language and directives about who is eligible, who isn't eligible, definitions for whatever implementing agency. In this case, the USDA is always the agency. So definitions to help them structure or think about how to implement a program, as well as preferential treatment and priority status for certain groups. When we're talking about grants, you often find maximum grant sizes. You'll find grant lengths. A lot of the nitty-gritty or directives, broad parameters for USDA to implement programs is included in the Farm Bill. And just as importantly, funding. Most of the time, funding. So I want to, the board in my slide probably doesn't, garbles it a little bit, but I want to tease out and talk a little bit about the types of funding in the Farm Bill, because this is an important piece of understanding the Farm Bill in general, but also the 2018 Farm Bill. So there are three types of funding when it comes to congressional legislation, but in this case, the Farm Bill. Entitlements. Entitlements are kind of the gold standard. That sort of means what it sounds like, entitled. So SNAP, food stamps is an example of an entitlement. And entitlements don't have a specific amount of money. What they have is the authority to increase as need increases. So as more people need SNAP benefits, the amount of spending increases to meet that need. The second type of funding, and this is the silver, I guess you would call it, if entitlements are the gold standard, the silver is mandatory funding. And that is a little bit what it sounds like. It's funding that is mandated to be spent in the Farm Bill or by the Farm Bill. And it's mandated, it has a specific amount of money. So the difference between entitlements is it's sort of an open-ended. Mandatory is X amount mandated to be spent from the Farm Bill. The third type is discretionary funding. And this is essentially when what will happen with lots of programs when they authorize them in the Farm Bill, they won't have entitlements and they won't have mandatory, but they will have the option to get discretionary funding. And that's option, part of what makes it the bronze standard, or not even a standard maybe, is that there's a whole other separate process to get that discretionary funding. Every year, there is an annual appropriations process where members of Congress on the Appropriations Committee decides which discretionary programs to fund and which not to. So, it's kind of, you really want mandated funding because mandated funding often comes with X amount per year, where discretionary funding's like, hey, if there's some money laying around, maybe it'll get funded. And as a result, there are often many programs and policies that are authorized in farm bills that never come to fruition, or don't come to fruition right away because they aren't provided mandatory funding and they have to seek that discretionary funding. And sometimes it takes a couple of years to get things moving and in place and to build the champions who are going to make sure programs get funded. All right, so before we talk a little more about the specifics in terms of the 2018 Farm Bill, I always like to share slides like this because oftentimes people want to know, what are we talking about? How do we put things into context in terms of the funding? So the 2018 Farm Bill was estimated at the time it passed, these are projections, but it was estimated to cost $428.3 billion. 76% of that is for nutrition programs, the lion's share of which is for SNAP, or previously known as food stamps, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The remainder, 24%, is the farm part of the Farm Bill. And that's where your conservation programs, commodity programs, crop insurance programs, pretty much everything else exists. And drilling down even further, 1% of that 24 is where local and regional food systems find themselves, or the funding for local and regional food development work is contained within that 1%. Always seems funny to me that, local foods is part of the 1%. I have no idea if anybody laughs in the virtual world, but a joke that I will often say when in the pre-pandemic world when we got to see all each other. So with that, let's talk about the 2018 Farm Bill. And I'm going to tick through some highlights from the 2018 Farm Bill relative to local and regional food systems, and then dig in a little bit more into some of those. The biggest one, the creation of LAMP, or the Local Agriculture Market Program. And this is it's not really a new program per se, it's an umbrella program that was created in order to provide permanent mandatory funding for a suite of existing local food programs. Some of these, hopefully, these are somewhat familiar to you, but that includes the Value-Added Producer Grant, the Local Food Promotion Program, the Farmers Market Promotion Program, and a new Regional Food Systems Partnership Program. And this permanent funding is really important. Prior to the 2018 Farm Bill, even though a number of these programs had existed for years, because of wonky budget rules, they had to be renewed in terms of funding as if they were brand new programs every time, which meant in order to fund a brand new program, you have to cut something somewhere else. So it really created a constant battler. It was really tricky for many years, even though these programs, such as the Value-Added Producer Grants program, has existed since early 2000, it was viewed as new spending because of these wonky budget rules. Thankfully, the 2018 Farm Bill made LAMP and all the programs that are under the LAMP umbrella permanent. So during the 2023 Farm Bill, they're assumed to continue on into the future. In order to fund them, there's not going to have to be cuts made somewhere else. Another really great highlight from the 2018 Farm Bill, and again in this permanent mandatory funding space, is the creation of the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, GUSNIP. Some of you, I would imagine many of you probably have heard of GusNIP by now, but what GusNIP is they took the previous Farm Bill program, the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentive Program, the Finney grants that have been funding SNAP incentive projects at farmers markets and retail food establishments for many years. They took that program, combined it with a new produce prescription pilot program, and called it the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program, named after a longtime advocate in the nutrition incentive space. And that was funded at 50 million, or approximately 50 million per year, with 10 million, or not 10 million percent, being available for produce prescription program. The big point, though, there again is it was made permanent. So in the 2023 Farm Bill, it is assumed to continue. There won't have to be cuts made to something else to keep that program moving forward. The 2018 Farm Bill also created a new Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Forms of Production and an Urban Agriculture Research and Extension Program. It also includes some instructions for farmers markets to be able to operate an electronic benefit transfer device at more than one farmers market, an issue that had been a big issue for the farmers market sector. And it also expanded the USDA's Healthy Food Financing Initiative. But like I said earlier, I want to drill in a little more to a couple of these highlights. The first one being LAMP, the Local Agriculture Market Program. So this is that umbrella program that was created to provide permanent mandatory funding for the farmers market and local food promotion program, oftentimes discussed as two separate programs, the farmers market promotion program and the local food promotion program. It also provided permanent value-added producer grants program, created a new regional food systems partnership program, and provided the rest of the funding to LAMP and do outreach and evaluation. Overall, any of you who've probably tried to apply to some of these over the last couple of years, you might say, well, they seem like the same program I looked at several years before. That's because, for the most part, the priorities and content of these programs stayed the same. I do want to mention a little bit about the funding, though. I talked about how much money for GusNIP, but didn't talk about LAMP. So the Local Agriculture Market Program was provided 50 million per year to be divided between the key sub-programs of LAMP. And that ends up being 23.5 million per year for farmers market and local food promotion program. And that's split between the two pieces. That's actually less funding than was provided for that program in the previous Farm Bill. However, that was one of the trade-offs that was made for making it permanent. And it's a good trade-off. The value-added producer grants program was provided 17.5 million per year, which is actually slightly more than the last Farm Bill provided for it. And for what that program also often gets supplemented by additional funding through the discretionary process. So you've got the mandated funding, and every year Congress typically adds more money into that program through the discretionary appropriations process. As part of VAPG, all the set-asides have been maintained, 10% set aside for beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged producers. LAMP includes 5 million for the regional food systems partnership program. That's the new one. And then also, as part of LAMP, one of the things that a highlight that I hope is going to be more of a highlight in the future, right now it's kind of a theoretical highlight, is this creates new food safety components. So one of the things that the 2018 Farm Bill added into the VAPG program is a new application option to apply just for small dollar grants to support food safety certification and food safety practice upgrades for farmers. This is one of those things that since the Food Safety Modernization Act was passed into law and has been slowly implemented, there's been an increasing request from farmers like, hey, if I've got to comply with this, can the federal government help rather than just make it an unfunded mandate? So we were able to win some victories in the Farm Bill to create this option. Unfortunately, the Trump administration didn't move forward with implementing it because it actually has to go through a rulemaking process to be implemented. But the Vilsack administration over the last couple months has started to move forward with the process of setting this up. So hopefully in the somewhat near future, there's going to be an option for farmers to apply for small dollar food safety financial assistance grants to help them upgrade practices, buy some equipment, and get certified that they're food safety safe so that they can reach new markets. One of the things that's also important to highlight about LAMP, or this is maybe the low light about LAMP, is one of the changes that had to be made in the trade-off for making this program permanent was cost share matching fund requirement changes. Specifically, the Farmers Market and Promotion Program now requires a 25% match. Previously, it did not require any matching funding to apply to that program. All the other, the matching fund requirement for VAPG is still 50%. Local Food Promotion Program is 25% still. And the new Regional Food Systems Partnership Program has a 25% matching requirement. All right, let's talk. This was the other place I really wanted to dig in because this is where some of the biggest changes or new programming is included in the 2018 Farm Bill. And that's in the space of urban agriculture. I don't know, as a side note, I don't know why my bullets on this slide changed to a flag and X's. It's a weird, interesting like conversion from one system to the other, but the flags and X's instead of bullets mean nothing. It's just a weird conversion thing. So the 2018 Farm Bill created the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Forms of Production. And as part of that Office of Urban Agriculture, there were a number of additional things under that kind of large heading. It created a 15-member National Advisory Committee to help oversee the office and make sure that the voices of urban agriculture stakeholders and communities are guiding the work of USDA when it comes to urban ag. It also included a brand new urban development competitive program, a new community compost and food waste reduction pilot cooperative agreements program, and also a directive to set up at least 10 new urban/suburban FSA county offices or add urban and suburban elements to existing FSA offices. Part of this is, again, kind of like those advisories, trying to make sure that the voices of people working in urban agriculture who have typically been largely left out of USDA conversations, making sure their voices are part of the conversation and helping to drive programming in a way that makes it so it actually takes into consideration the needs of urban agriculture producers, practitioners, and communities. How unfortunately, that Office of Urban Agriculture was provided zero mandatory funding. All it had was the option to seek out or to get discretionary funding through the annual appropriations process. Thankfully, though, through some work we've been doing at the coalition, but also due to some champion the Hill, the Congress has provided this with some discretionary funding. So you may have actually heard of some folks applying for this program. It's been quite competitive because the first round only had 5 million. I think the next one was up to 7 million, and we're hoping next year this program will have about $8 to $10 million. So Congress has been slowly providing it some funding and in that funding. Hopefully, one of the things that could occur in the next Farm Bill is getting some mandatory funding for it to make it more consistent. The other big piece in urban agriculture space was the creation of a urban or an other emerging agricultural production research and extension. That one's a mouthful. Bottom line is it's competitive grants to do urban ag research, education, and then extension work. That program, you may, or maybe not, be saying, hey, I haven't heard of that. When is the RFA for that? That program has actually not started money yet. The Farm Bill did provide it with 10 million in mandatory funding. However, it was under the sort of the agreement or the understanding that that program moved forward with any of their funding until that 15-member advisory committee was formed first. I think there's a understandable skepticism relative to the USDA to move forward with programming for urban agriculture without some serious oversight and accountability from the community. As of this moment, we're expecting sometime in the month of November for that 15-member advisory committee to finally be announced. They started taking nominations earlier this year, but it languished. Well, prior to this administration, the Trump administration did nothing with it, and the Vilsack administration has begun to, or the Biden administration under Secretary Vilsack has begun to move forward with this. They took nominations earlier this year and are expected to name that advisory committee sometime in this month or before the end of the calendar year. That was probably a lot of information. Before to questions, I want to highlight this for you, and I'm sharing in the chat box as well. On our website is a free grassroots guide to the Farm Bill. We do this after every Farm Bill. We try to take the programming, the changes, the policies that are in relative to sustainable and resilient food systems, and try to make them as easily accessible to the public as possible. And you'll find if you go to the grassroots guide, we've got things divided up by a number of different issue areas. It's not just local food programs. We've got information about beginning farmer programs, conservation, credit, crop insurance, organic production. We've got a pretty diverse array of resources and information at that link. All right, so let's take some time before we pivot towards the listening session. I want to see if folks have questions about anything I just presented.
And if you feel so bold or emboldened, or just want to start to kind of exercise moving around, feel free to take yourself off mute as well and just voice your questions. Otherwise, we have the chat running. And, so I'm going to ask you, Wes, about, so this is the lead up to the Farm Bill, but you're always doing these kind of cycles, right? And one of the things we hear a little less about is, okay, post-Farm Bill, like what does it mean for us to, it's one thing to get the language in the bill, but then how it lives and touches the ground is another thing. And so what are some things that NSAC does post-bill passage to ensure that the interests of members are attended to?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad you highlighted it, because in terms of Farm Bill work, in terms of just legislative and congressional and public policy work, implementation is often the least paid attention to and one of the most important pieces of it. It's one thing to authorize programs and to write things to look a certain way. If there aren't people holding USDA accountable and helping to provide recommendations for them to figure out how to, okay, well, I've got broad parameters, but what about in this situation? What do I do about X, Y, or Z? If there isn't a active community engaging them in those type of issues or that type of implementation work, they really can screw things up, or they don't move forward with things. So we do a lot of it is much more, that, as people say, inside baseball or inside the beltway kind of work. But one of the things we always end up doing is meeting regularly with members of the USDA to provide our feedback and our thoughts on some of those questions they may be asking about, well, okay, the Farm Bill says this, but it doesn't answer these questions. And we will then try to, the same way we are a conduit of our members' priorities in the Farm Bill, we try to be a conduit of our members' priorities relative to implementation. And that, meetings with members of the USDA, we often put together letters, sometimes sign-on letters. It's really just kind of a iterative process of meeting recommendations. Sometimes we engage Congress as well to help kind of back us up, to say, maybe have a letter from Congress go to the USDA to say, hey, yeah, here's what we intended by this. So it's messy work, but that kind of gives a little flavor for it.
Yeah, Noreen has a question, and don't know, will you be getting to some of the content for the next Farm Bill in the listening session?
I'm not sure if I would say we'll be. So what I hope to be doing is getting feedback from all of you on what you think the next Farm Bill needs to do. And we're early-ish in the process. So what the next bill will contain, it's hard to see at this point. It's hard to know really what we need from community stakeholders, except for what we need is your voices to know what you need, what needs to be changed or what's missing.
And to that end, so maybe you could talk a little bit about, so you represent your members, right? And so maybe a little bit about membership for your organization, but then also, I know that you do a lot of collaborating with other organizations. So I used to run the Ohio field office of American Farmland Trust. And I know that that's one of your partners. So maybe the two, just a little bit about your membership, but then also about the other organizations that you coalesce with.
Yeah, so, our members are as I was saying earlier, there's like 130 of them. They vary widely in terms of their size, their capacity, and their engagement. Some of our members are super engaged with our work. Some are just members in solidarity to contribute to support our work and our coalition, and don't really engage on a day-to-day basis. But sort of the process for becoming members is not, we don't make it very active, because we want people to want to be part of our coalition. We don't just assign people up to be members, but so we have a whole grassroots team that often works with potential organizations who are interested in becoming part of our membership and being part of our campaigns. And if anybody was interested in that, I would just say that contacting me separately, I could connect folks up with our grassroots team who does that kind of membership development and building partnerships with organizations. As far as organizations that are outside of the official INSAC membership, we definitely, like you mentioned, Jill, work a lot with other organizations. American Farmland Trust is one of them, that there are many issues that we align on, and we have, we share the same priorities or opinions, and we will oftentimes collaborate on things. In fact, one of the things I'm actually working with the American Farmland Trust right now, along with the Agriculture Viability Alliance, to put together a joint letter of recommendations to the USDA regarding how they some plans to implement some of their supply chain funding for local and regional food systems. So what that looks like from day to day or from week to week can change, but we oftentimes try to find common ground with other organizations and figure out ways we can collectively advance those issues.
There's a question in here coming in from Brooke up in Cleveland. And she asks, how do you evaluate and consider implementation of programs funded through past farm bills when advocating for what should be included in future farm bills?
It's a good question. And I would say that that's really a core part of what we end up working on in the farm bill is how do we build upon past programs, past achievements, and kind of reform those to make them better. So, we definitely look at hey, one of the things that I think we're gonna want to be digging into deeper is, for instance, is this new regional food systems partnership program. It's brand new in the last farm bill. It's had a couple grant rounds so far. How's it lived up to the intention? That's not clear yet. But one of the things we want to do is learn about how that has been used evaluate how that's been used recently so that we can try to work with members of Congress to identify which that program could be improved in the next Farm Bill. And we do a lot of that kind of work with other programs and with other issue areas, identifying, okay, well, this worked, this didn't, how can we build upon that in the next Farm Bill? So we like to think of the Farm Bill as an iterative process. We're building from one Farm Bill to the next to try to make better programs and policies.
Thanks. And I think Emily was also adding to that there's a lot of feedback in NSAC's issue committees. There's also another question here from Lauren, and she's asking, has the location of the 10 new urban suburban FSA county office pilots been announced? And she's specifically interested or curious, there'll be a new office in Ohio.
They have been announced, and they've also announced that they were going to add some additional ones, because like as I said earlier, it's 10 plus. I cannot off the top of my head recall if any of them are in Ohio or not. Sorry, I don't have that at the tip of my, let's see, wait, I found some of them. Here's one list. I just found a quick press release that's got when they added 6, but I do not have the complete list in front of me. So sorry, I do not know, but I do know that a number of them have been named, and the USDA has also indicated that they plan on doing more than just 10. And so if Ohio isn't one of those right now, it very well could be in the future.
Great, thanks. The conversation earlier answering Brooke's question made me think, are there applied research needs? Like does NTEC have this wish list for applied research out there? I'm thinking there's lots of students who are looking to do like program evaluation, policy evaluation. So this is a selfish request.
Yeah, we do not have such a running list, but I feel like it's a list that sometimes organically pops up. But yeah, we do not have a running list. But we do actually also have through INSAC, we're structured by issue committees. One of our issue committees is research, education, and extension, and they often very much focus on on those issues. But we don't have a running list. It probably would be great if we did. It's just, there's only so many hours in the day and so much capacity, and it isn't one of the things we've gotten to yet.
Thanks for that. Any other questions before we move on to the next segment? And I see that Tia chimed in. There is one in Cleveland.
Right. Yeah, I had a sense that I thought there may have been one in Cleveland, but I didn't want to say there was if there was.
Yeah, any other questions before we move on? All right. Yeah, so take it away, Wes, and I'll put that Menti link again in the chat, particularly for those of you who joined us a little bit later. Yeah,
that would be great. Because yes, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but that'd be great. Please share the link. And so you just kind of want to situate a little bit more where things are at and why we're doing this here right now. So you may have heard me mention the 2023 Farm Bill, and you may say, well, that's kind of far away, isn't it? It is, and it's not. What's going to be moving forward this next year, 2022, is really going to be the year in which members of Congress and stakeholder groups start putting together policy and program ideas to try to get included in the next Farm Bill. And once we get to 2023, it's going to be off to the races. That's when the actual legislative process will begin, with the goal of trying to get it done in 2023. But so much of the actual work of figuring out what's going to go into the Farm Bill is going to be situated in 2022, largely probably the second half of 2022. But that first half is going to be all about building out those programs, those new ideas, working with members of Congress to find people who are willing to champion various issues. So that's why, we're kind of at this stage right now here at NSAC. We're planning to spend a lot of the winter and early spring months doing listening sessions like this to gather feedback and ground truth some of what we've been hearing through our members or we've come up with on our own. All right. I gave Emily a warning ahead of time that her face was going to be on this slide. I didn't do that on purpose because of the Ohio crowd. This was just one of our slides we already had put together, but it sure works out well. So for the rest of our time together, this is going to be all about seeking input from you. And there's going to be a list. There's going to be a couple options, a couple different channels you can do that. But before we jump in, just want to make sure folks feel comfortable and make sure encourage you to please share. And you may say, okay, well, what should I share? What can I share? We're going to be focused on local and regional food systems, but it doesn't have to be only that. That's kind of the main focus. But anything you have in terms of Farm Bill is fine to be sharing during this listening session. You don't need to be a policy expert. Your lived experience is what matters the most. So some of the type of things you might think of sharing, whether that's orally or through a chat box, is a specific idea you had, a specific recommendation on how to change an existing program, a need that isn't being met, that you don't know where it fits in, but a need that isn't being met. The more specific, the better, but big picture is fine as well. It doesn't have to be specific. And so I mentioned a couple different options or channels for sharing here. First is orally. Once we get going here, we're going to take raised hands with the little emoji thing, or how we'll do try to make it organized and give folks a chance to just hop on here, get off mute. Speak for 60 seconds, say your name, share what your idea is or what your feedback is. You also have the chat box. Feel free to put things in the chat box anytime you want. And then also there's the polling tool, the Mentimeter, that we're going to be cycling through as this moves forward, that you can fill out on your own time right away or as we move forward. So again, 3 options: oral, chat box, and Mentimeter. Also wanted to mention what's going to happen with this information. Anything you share here will ultimately be aggregated and will become anonymous. We're going to be compiling it together with information from around the country to build us a big picture. So in other words, we're not going to be sharing anything you say attributed to you. So feel free to have the flexibility to share what you want to share and not worry about your name being attached to it. Most of this information is just going to be used internally, and if anything is used publicly, it will be aggregated and anonymous. All right. Check it out. Before we get to some of the questions, it looks like some folks have already been filling this out. You can see as it kind of changes as people fill it out. We've got one farmer with us, a number of nonprofit folks, some academics, and some others. This is good because we want to make sure we know what the kind of audience it is that we're getting feedback from. So thank you. I'm going to keep moving forward, but as you feel free to keep filling things out. Again, Mentimeter is not something you have to follow on directly with me. You can do that on your own time. So let's see what our others were. We've got a food systems planner, nonprofit, a farmer and nonprofit. So a great diversity of what our a vibrant food and farming system looks like. Okay. Oh, of the farmers. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Getting of course, not a farmer. A lot of nonprofit academic students here, which is great. We're all part of this together. And looks like some fruits, nuts, vegetables, livestock. Great. Okay, so let's now talk about local food systems. Now we got a little bit, you've helped us fill out the polls so we get a sense of who's here and who's with us. Let's talk about local regional food systems. And this is where I want to open things up for oral, chat box, everything's an option. And here's kind of, some questions to try to get you get the juices flowing in your minds. You don't have to be boxed in by these, but here are the questions. Looking forward to now's the time if folks want to hop in and share things orally. Let's do that now, or the chat box as well. And I'm putting the questions into the chat box so folks can see those as well there, if that's easier. Who's gonna be the brave soul to go first? And there's no bad responses. Again, as I said earlier, big picture is fine. This is an opportunity for you to share.
Hi there, Wes. My name is Amy Boddicker-Baskus, and I think I'll just answer the question broadly to say that to access USDA programs is complicated, right? I write grants for a living, and these are some of the thorniest to navigate. And then when you add match requirements, filing requirements, partner requirements, they're just lots and lots of hoops.
Yeah.
Not that we don't all willingly learn to navigate them, but it's not the most streamlined or obvious process.
Yeah, understood. Thank you, Amy.
And there's a comment in the chat, Wes, from Tia, and she's pointing out that as a micro farmer, she's got about 4 acres. That many of these programs aren't accessible.
Yep, understood. And I'm just so folks know, like I'm mostly just taking what you have to share right now, not trying to respond to things just for the sake of making sure everybody has an opportunity to contribute.
I'm not super familiar with the SNAP process, but I believe one issue that we've been running across in our organization is that they can't be used for, or SNAP can be used for deliveries to people's homes. And so, with transportation being a big barrier for a lot of folks, that ultimately becomes a barrier as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jory, and especially during the pandemic, it really has highlighted that. Absolutely, thank you.
And I would add to that, I know that some of the conversation, and I don't know exactly where we are on this right now, but that for some of the pilots that were being done, it was really only the big retailers that were able to be part of those pilots. And I think there's a real interest, particularly from folks in this network, to see alternative retailers, smaller retailers, alternative types of outlets be included in kind of the future thinking about who can qualify to do those, well, not just the pilots, but as it gets moved into, I assume, maybe a more permanent position.
Yeah, and Jill, you're referring to online SNAP transactions, correct? Yeah, that's what I assume. Definitely also something that the pandemic, highlighted pretty centrally. Others.
Hi, Wes. My name is Brittany. Actually, I did a research project, well, actually my dissertation concerning Black farmers, urban farmers within Toledo and Dayton. And one of the things that they definitely talked about was accessibility to the funds in terms of experience and also partnerships. One of the barriers that they've encountered was, yes, there are a lot of partners, but they are hesitant because they feel that their voices will still not be heard, even though they are the prime recipient of this grant or funding or anything of that aspect. And so they are kind of discouraged from even applying to these grants because of that, in addition to the confusion or lack of, I guess, acceptability of quote unquote urban farming within the area, especially if it hasn't been introduced to those certain like city council or just municipal leaders as well. So that was a big thing that they were talking about, in addition to policy concerning like hoop houses. I know in Ohio it's a certain dimensions for that, but definitely just processing and marketing and distribution on top of volunteering help for whatever time that they had.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Brittany. That's helpful. That tracks with some of what we've heard other places. Thank you. Others, again, the chat box is totally an open opportunity to use, and orally as well. And we'll, those of you who've been moving forward with the Mentimeter, you've probably filled out some other things that you haven't seen pop up on the screen yet. We'll get to some of the responses to those polls shortly, but just want to continue to leave the space open for oral feedback.
This is Noreen. I would like to see some kind of a permanent process in the Farm Bill that, especially because SNAP and nutrition is the biggest part of the Farm Bill, that involves the recipients of those programs having direct connection with and input into what affects them.
Got it. So more of a feedback loop between SNAP recipients and the way in which those programs are administered.
Yes, and some kind of funding that helps recipients be a part of giving their feedback, because it's, even at the local level, this is hard. It's something we're working on at Local Matters, but it's very difficult, and people need support to be able to give their input, either from at home, giving it into national, or somebody bringing them to Washington.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, and I hear you.
Hey, Wes, I see Tia has her hand up, but before that, there was a question in the chat about farm to school funding. So the farm to school funding, that comes through a different avenue, correct?
Yes, that is part of the child nutrition reauthorization process. And so the answer is it possible that, or the question is it possible that it could change? It is possible, but most likely not. And to get a little more in the details on it, so there's the farm to school grant program. There's pretty much no way that that's going to get moved into the Farm Bill from the child nutrition reauthorization. However, there are some policies that could impact farm to school that could be included in the Farm Bill. The very specific one that I've worked on and worked with your one of your senators, Senator Brown's office on, is geographic preference and making it easier for schools to procure locally. This is an issue that started in the Farm Bill, and then it got expanded in a child nutrition reauthorization, and it's sort of been stuck in limbo since then. So it's possible that some things related to farm to school could get addressed in the Farm Bill, but mostly no.
And Tia, if you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. I just wanted to go back to what Maureen was saying about representation, as far as having various people at the table. And I wanted to suggest that there would be small and micro farm representation also. I know it's a lot of small farmers. I'm one of the small farmers that actually we do accept SNAP, but a lot of my partners, my co-workers, my fellow farmers do not accept SNAP because they don't want to deal with all the paperwork, the headache, the reporting that comes with that avenue. And so I'd like to see that be a more streamlined so that more small and micro farms can accept these programs, the SNAP, the WIC, the senior farmers market, the produce perks, all these wonderful programs. If we make it easier for the farmer, then we make it easier for the people.
Absolutely. Yes, I hear you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tia. Others, it looks like we got about 5 minutes left, and wrapping things up to see the final poll results won't take long. So we've got a time for a few more inputs. I was going to say questions, but it's not questions. A few more inputs. I don't know. I can't figure out the right word for it.
Wes, do you have a 1-minute explanation of why nutrition is in the Farm Bill?
Sure. Yeah, let me see if I can do this in 1 minute. So think about it like this: a subsidy for farm products. So the more consumers have to purchase food and farm products, that means hopefully the more markets farmers have for food and farm products. So it originally started as sort of that, as kind of a way to also get more people buying farm products by making sure they have the purchasing power to do so. And then also there's a whole political history involved, where as the country has become more and more urbanized, the actual power in farm country in terms of Congress to advance anything has dwindled over many decades. So I believe it was in the 50s, 60s, right around there, kind of what came together was this broad coalition of farm interests who wanted to keep getting farm bills passed, but didn't have the political power in Congress to do it. They came together with those who were in urban communities who were very interested in making sure that low-income families had enough money and food to eat. They kind of came together and formed what people sometimes call as the Farm Bill Coalition. And it's been those two pieces that have been essential to passing farm bills. So without the two together, you get neither.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add, a bit of history that folks don't sometimes know, is that at the very beginning, it literally was taking excess commodities and storing it and then giving it out in cities. And so that's the legacy of the commodities that are subsidized. So we often talk about how fruits and vegetables are treated differently. There's a legacy from the 30s as to why that is. And so there's some interesting history there. Wes, there's a question, Tony Logan has a question in the chat about the recovery funds available for Black and Indigenous farmers, just asking if you happen to know the status of that.
Yeah. So I do sort of. I don't know the latest status of the lawsuits, but here's what I can say. So that original funding, $4 billion, was included in the American Rescue Plan that was passed earlier this year. One of the things that is included in, you may have heard of the budget reconciliation bill that Congress is trying to pass, or the Build Back Better Act. One of the things they've included in that is they basically a retooling of that program for Black and Indigenous farmers to get compensated, and particularly debt relief. They've retooled that. If the Build Back Better Act is passed, what they've created in that is a larger small farm debt relief program that is structured in a way that they think gets around the legal issues that have been at the heart of the lawsuits, and does so in a way that would make small farm debt relief available to much broader, not just Black and Indigenous farmers, but non-Black and Indigenous farmers as well. White farmers would have access to this, but most of the funding would be targeted, and higher debt relief would be provided to what they've created kind of a definition for. It's economically distressed farmers, but the way they've done it, put together that definition in terms of geography and existing farming history, would lead to 90% of those who would have been covered by this original provision would be covered by the new. So it looks like if the Build Back Better Act budget reconciliation package is passed and enacted, there will be some significant debt relief provided from that.
Thanks, Wes. I really appreciate it. And I know that you might have a couple of things that you want to show pretty quickly. And as you're doing that, everyone, I'm going to pop in the chat the plenary, the link to the plenary session that's going to happen after our 15-minute break. And here we go. But with that, Wes, just a huge thank you from Ohio, getting us up to speed and listening to folks here in the room about what they're thinking about the Farm Bill, and always just being a great source of information. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad, happy to do it. And real quick to wrap up, and then I see one more question. They sort of mentioned all this. We're going to take this and incorporate this into our work moving forward on the 2023 Farm Bill. Here's how to stay in touch. Is it debt relief only through the USDA? So yes, it is mostly just debt through the USDA. I believe there is some funds in there to deal with guaranteed loans. So loans that came from private lenders but are guaranteed by the federal government. So I believe it is both just USDA direct loans get debt relief, and then there is some debt relief for those who have guaranteed loans.
Thank you, and please, everyone, join us in 15 minutes. We're hearing from Stacey Malkin on the U.S. Right to Know. And until then, enjoy your break. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.